everybody. Welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Scents. I'm your host, Cameron Ford, and today's episode is a debrief from search and rescue teams that have recently been deployed in the areas from the hurricane that came through and devastated the southeast part of the United States, specifically North Carolina. And before I get into that, I want to introduce the guests I have on the show that all took part in various ways in that disaster recovery and rescue efforts. So first, I want to thank Diana Bunch for coming on. Thank you for taking your time to do this.
Thank you.
And then Jack Thorpe, thank you very much for doing this. And
Absolutely.
then I want to make sure I say it right, but Athena, you say Haus, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Athena, thank you guys all for coming on the show. And I want to start with just an intro of you guys, just a little bit about your background, how you got to where you're at today doing the search and rescue or recovery aspects of your jobs. So Diana, I'll start with you and we'll kind of go around the room, so to speak.
Okay. I'm retired Air Force, and during several different assignments, I would see or learn a little bit about search and rescue. And ironically, I started in Alabama, of all places, in South Alabama, where you really wouldn't think you would need search and rescue dogs that much, because there's not a lot of, it's just more of an urban environment where we were. I started in 1998 with an area search dog and moved from there to trailing dog for a little bit of time. And between the different assignments, stateside or overseas, I would continue to do search and rescue when I could. And when we retired and moved to Florida, I went back to doing it full time. I was with Class Kids National Search Foundation for a long time. And then our director resigned, and that part of the Class Kids, the search and rescue component went away, which created a void, if you will. So the team continued on in that legacy with Legacy K9 Search Team. And I've been running a couple of cadaver dogs for a long time now. So I pretty much do, the team does everything, of course, but myself personally, I have cadaver dogs.
Okay.
In a nutshell, if you will.
Jack, go ahead. We'll do your background.
So I work with the Nash County Sheriff's Department now in North Carolina. I'm a retired state trooper. I retired about a year and a half ago from there. I got into search and rescue in 2000, and I worked with another team back then and stayed with that mentor for quite a while. Worked the area search dog. Later on, after I started a new team, brought on some more people with HRD, but worked at area search dog for a little while back then, and then switched over to HRD a couple years later. So I've been doing HRD since probably 2003 or 4. I started the current team, the North Carolina Troopers Association K9 unit, back in 2018. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and we operate that way. Once I retired from the Highway Patrol, I just remained the director of it. So I have several members on the team, most HRD. We are training a couple of area search dogs right now, and we have some qualified and certified trailing dogs now as well.
All right. And Athena, your turn.
I was a firefighter for about 3 decades almost, and within that realm I was a part of Ohio Task Force when they first became, actually before they became Ohio Task Force. We were a local trench team. So I started out back early, probably 2000, on that journey with K9s, and I've been on 3 FEMA task forces. My forte originally was live find disaster, obviously, before they did the human remains aspect of it. And I did have one of the first human remains dogs that when they started that program. I'm not doing the federal aspect of it anymore. I do mostly local response and state things. But my forte has always been disaster, so I kind of developed my dogs in that regard. They kind of have to have that ability before I will continue their training for other things, and then I cross-train them for all the other aspects. So I've had pretty good experience, several dogs throughout that's the FEMA system as well as in the private realm.
So obviously we have a very good, diverse, group of well-experienced people on this. We'll call it a panel, for lack of a better term. Now, the enormity of this disaster probably can't even be put into words for most people to understand what had to be worked through, dealt with when it comes to logistics. Just before we even get to the dog aspect, there is so much that had to be, like I said, logistically dealt with. It's the closest thing I can relate it to from the world I came from is like a war zone. And when there's a war zone, there's just you just got to figure out ways to get the job done. You plan, but you have to be very adaptive to a lot of plans because there's just things that the world and the environment will throw at you that you constantly have to change. And in order to get ready for that, we have to train. And training prepares you only so much. So I kind of want to start there, and any one of you guys can answer, and it can kind of just bounce around based on how the conversation goes. But in the search and rescue world specifically, from my experience as more of a instructor traveling around and teaching and working with various different teams, specifically mostly in the cadaver side of the equation, sometimes live find, but more heavily towards cadaver. Just like many other detection disciplines, the variety of training goals, objectives, methodologies, and so forth are extremely varied. So, with that said, how had training prepared you all for what you had to do on this deployment in reality? And we'll go into kind of lessons learned, but up until that point, how had training prepared you guys?
Well, I can start with that. So we got called early. For HRD, we got called early. So the storm had passed, and right after that, emergency management calls and says, hey, we need HRD dogs up there. So my assistant director of the team, Anicia Justice, and myself, we climbed in this Tahoe that I'm sitting in right now, and we started driving towards western North Carolina. We got up to about 50 miles, 60 miles east of there, and we had to stop. So we had to stop, we had to turn around, go another 50, 60 miles west or back, and stay at a hotel that night, and then try to get back up there the next day. So the next day, finally, they had plowed through some of the mud, and in that area, we were able to get through by escort, and then just going, kind of zigzagging around I-40, because there was mudslides everywhere. So DOT had just pushed through so some cars, law enforcement could get through. So even though it was open, it still took us 6 or 7 hours just from, less than 100 miles away to get to Asheville. We went and we went to the EOC for Asheville City Fire Department. We had our assignment. They assigned us to attach to New Jersey Task Force 1. They hadn't had any HRD dogs respond yet. So it was live find dogs and us. We stayed with them for about 5.5 days. But when we got there, I think that the training applied in many ways, but there were also, when you look around, and Anicia and I were standing in 18 inches of mud, and we're looking around at the Lowe's and the Best Buy and all these different places on Swananoa Road, these huge piles, 30, 40 feet high. There was a house on a bridge, and the bridge was 40 feet above the water. But at the time of the flood, it was right in the water. So the water went so high that we were in 6 to 18 inches of mud on third floor apartments. But when you stood there and you looked around at 360 degrees from you, all you saw was devastation. And I wasn't talking about just a small amount of devastation. We're talking enormous amount. And I think Diana at some point was in that same area that we were at separate times. There was a train derailed. There was flames coming up. You look one way, and there's a bridge down. There is a tractor trailer from nose to tail just sticking straight up out of the ground. There's a famous video of a U-Haul that was just overtaken by water. We were standing right beside it. It was just devastation everywhere and mud all over. So you can train only so much. I don't think since 9/11 there has been a disaster where canines have worked in such harsh environments. I could be wrong. Maybe there's something out there somewhere that I haven't seen. But for me, I've never seen anything like it. And I've been in emergency services for over 30 years, canine handler for almost 25. I've never seen anything like that in my life. So, some amount of training kicked in, and then we just we looked at our environment. We had to take it all in, and then we started working. So when it comes to training, my team, we train on a lot of distractions. We will throw out deer bones. We will throw out deer meat. We will throw out hamburgers. We will throw out gloves, because you handle training aids with gloves. So you throw out clean gloves. We throw out different cases, and we'll throw out glass jars and things like that, because those are all things that are attached to the training aids. So you do them all clean, you work through those distractions, and that helps you later on down the road. So when we were out there working, there was a lot of distractions. There was dead animals, there was gas, there was oil, there was mud, there was all kinds of things that had odor to them. Even dead insects and other kinds of things on the ground, just, meat from a restaurant that got, washed away from the restaurant. Just different things in the piles. And I was very happy with the fact that the dogs were able to work through that. Both Fiji and Anicia with Dahlia were able to work through that quite well. And we didn't have a single even alert on any distraction odor, whether it be animal bones or anything else. It's a novel odor, so they'll go to it and smell it, and then they just walk away from it. Now, when we did hit on human remains, they did their job. So the training really paid off. And I think when it comes to long negatives, I think that was big for us. We work a lot of long negatives because these dogs were working between 13 and 16 hours a day. I don't know the exact number of searches during the whole time. We did at least over 80 searches in 18 inches of mud. We were searching buildings and apartments where, people got washed away from them. We were in collapsed structures. We were on water on the boat. We caused a huge amount of damage to our team boat just getting through all of the debris that was in the water. And when I say debris, I'm talking about so much debris that you can't see the water. You're in it, but you can't see it. And you're plowing through it like a snowplow. It was that bad. And so when it comes to long negatives, these dogs were working for so long that you have to train on that. If you don't train on long negatives, these dogs are, after 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes, they're going to start to break down. Or they will start to, even tap you looking for a reward or something like that. So you have to vary that. And so we've done a lot of that with our team, and I'm happy with that because it really helped us in the field on this. And like I said, I've never seen anything like it. You can train only so much, whether it be you're a wilderness handler, whether you're doing crime scenes, whether you're doing just water, even if you're a disaster handler. In my opinion, that area, I don't think you can train for so much of that. You just can't. So you have to adapt and you have to work through it. The training happens while you're doing the deployment. So that's, and when we were done, I would basically, and Anicia would give the dog a command, whether it be a sit or a hear or, a heel or whatever, after the search was over, and, just kind of move on to a different command of obedience and then reward. So the dogs were getting rewarded a lot, even if they weren't finding anything, and that kept them going. So I was really happy with that part of it. But it was definitely difficult. It was the most difficult deployment I've ever been on.
there's the very last part you just described is something I started adding more recently in the lectures I do for all types of detection dogs. Is we give a cue to go search, but we don't let them know when it's over with as clean or concise as the search cue prompts to start. So what I started sharing was, and I took this from my friend in Austria, Florian Schneider. They do kind of like a finish command. So it's either like, for obviously in their language, but all done, or just like you said, a position. For them, it comes to the middle between their legs. And just like you said, it was for the reasons you just described, which is I can give the dog a break, or if I see something I like that occurred, good searching for an extended period of time, I can stop, I can reward, I can dispraise. There's a lot of options too by having a start and a stop cue. And then, like he says, they also have a recall as another thing, and the recall can get reinforcement depending on, obviously, situations that where a recall is absolutely needed for a safety purpose. But in training, they can do it, and it may or may not. All of these things have a variable reinforcement schedule to them. But I hadn't thought about doing a end of search queue. All my years of working dogs up until recently, I just did a search command, and we were done. We just pulled off and walked back to our vehicle or whatever, the end of the search was. So to hear you guys say that was something that you used is it's pretty cool to know that we're evolving and adapting. Now, bringing it back to both Diana and Athena, what about you guys? Now, I know you made a great post on social media, which we'll dive into a little bit more coming ahead, but up to this point, how did you guys feel about training, and how did training prepare you for this kind of deployment?
For me, certainly all the things that Jack brought up, we do also, all the distractions and trying to train in the environments that we search. Trying to, not, people post all the time the picture of the nice field and saying this is training, and then they'll show a picture of some horrible location to say this is reality of a search. And we try to not have that. We try to expose the dogs to as much as we can, because pretty much most of the time we're searching, we're not going to find a body. So the dogs have to get used to everything else in life. They have to smell everything else, smell it in its various sizes and stages, if you will. The whole thing about just putting like one peanut in your scent lineup, kind of your odor recognition drills, that seems to get the dog's attention. We always put these big items in there, toys or different things, and you put some teeny tiny thing and the dog stops because it's like, oh my gosh, what's this teeny tiny thing? And the same thing with a very large item. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know which of the words, but from a training perspective, even though we're in more of an urban environment here, we do get a lot of searches where there's just a ton of debris. And during the deployment, one of the teammates says, certainly the scale was much different, but we're exposed to the same items, but on a smaller scale on a lot of our searches. We have the swamps, and we have the homeless camps and the houses that are just in horrible conditions, and everything you can think of. I mean, I've been on searches in the houses where I stop and think, is there anything literally that is not in this house right now? And I mean, there'd just be so much trash and so much rotten food and rotten, just decomposing animals. But again, the scale was quite different. So you take that, and when you deploy, so your dog says, yes, I'm exposed to this, I'm kind of familiar with this, but then you have your distractors, like Jack was saying, we're not just talking about rotten food. There's a restaurant right there that is no longer there. So you have these 20, 30, 40-pound bags of rotten food. So that scale of that odor is quite different for the dogs to take in, and for the people. That's one of the things that I think we experienced more, was we would have to go check areas because somebody smelled something really bad. And every single time it was either rotten food or a dead animal. And not just a piece, because in training we go and find a small piece. We put out maybe like Jack, you put a hamburger out or a small piece of pork or something. Now we're talking about the entire pig, the entire deer, the entire dog, the entire of everything, and that mixed in with everything else in that house, in that freezer, in that refrigerator, everything all together. And the dogs have to be able to take all that in and process it and move on. So I think all the training here, when we try to expose to real world things, and we go to seminars where you surround yourself with people like Athena, they're going to call you on it. You know, when you're training, and you're just like, no, you know, you try to make excuses for your dog or something, and you don't get, you know, they don't allow it. So that's always been very helpful. So we don't let the dogs kind of rehearse the bad stuff best we can. It's not perfect by any means, but best we can.
Yeah, it's super important. Athena, what about for you?
So from my perspective, I've been to a lot of disasters, been to a lot of hurricane deployments. But what I will say, having been to Katrina and Rita and the miles and miles of debris on the land, the miles and miles of debris on the water was a little bit astounding. And definitely, obviously, I'm a distraction girl. I like all the distractions, and we try to do novelty things, and we try to think outside the box and utilize whatever our experiences are. But from my perspective as an instructor, I realize that we're missing out on that a lot as handlers as well. You know, I've heard a lot of excuses. Well, we just don't do enough as distractions. Well, the reality of that was there was no getting away from distractions. There was distractions, it was whole households times 10 in the lake floating. So if you have a dog that's very visual and, you know, will get excited about bubbles in the water, having all this wood and household items and kids' toys and, you know, furniture floating, refrigerators, all of that is going to be a huge issue if you don't do all of that on land and in your daily training, just, you know. And so that was, you know, my first thought was, you know, if you don't do that, the blanks was another one. You know, both of my dogs had to work very long periods of time. I think Joey worked like 45 minutes in the woods at one point, which was basically up to his neck in mud with brambles, with household items. He's a 3-year-old Malinois. And so the 3-year-old came out because by the end of the search, he was like, all right, can I give you an item to, like, can we do the thing now? And I wasn't upset with him. And I realized that now we have things to work on. There's things we have to kind of clean up with him. He's a young dog and, it's fine. He'll be fine. But for me, it was kind of like, okay, if I wasn't aware of what he was doing, I might perceive it differently. But it was more of a like, hey, can we play now? This has been 45 minutes of me up to my, you know, neck and searching this entire area. And so, you know, again, my seasoned dog, she had none of that. She was very serious. She worked the river. I think the day we did the rapids, I think we were gone like 3 or 4 hours. I'm not really sure how long we were on the river. We would get off and she would, you know, work the slash piles. Mostly it was a human would say, we have an odor here. Can you check it? Or this area has not been checked yet. And so she would cover those debris piles. So I'm very fortunate because I do have a disaster background. And so I train my dogs for that, but I also train them for all the other things. So, you know, sometimes in the federal world, people get hung up on, well, we're just doing rubble. The reality is we haven't really had rubble. I mean, they had Surfside, but we haven't really had rubble since 9/11. And in that realm, the live find dogs that they had were not, you know, finding anything, unfortunately. And so I think as a handler, everybody, I don't care what you're doing, you need to get out of your mindset, well, we only do this. Because there was a whole lot of handlers that wanted to deploy that their dogs were not ready for what these dogs worked. And I'm very fortunate. I get to see a lot of dogs throughout the year, both law enforcement and, you know, in the civilian side or the search and rescue side. But the excuses and all of that, you know, there's no excuses. You know, you have to prepare for what you're going out on, and that not only your dog but also you, and be prepared for that, because these conditions were not easy. We're getting stuck in mud, kind of like you're just being sucked into the mud, There's nobody there to save you. You're going to have to get yourself out while your dog is working ahead, because they're continuing on doing their thing while you are trying. The bumbling human is in the background trying to get out of those areas or figure out how to mitigate, because the dogs are much more agile and delicate than we are as far as that goes. But I think you have to look at everything as a training. That's just my philosophy. Everything is a training. So, and adding whatever you can to challenge yourself and your dog. If everything is beautiful and perfect and pristine, and you're setting every problem to validate your own ego, that's not going to help you in these conditions. These conditions were extreme. We had to be self-sufficient. There were no toilets. There was no water. Even in the hotel we stayed in, there was no electricity. We were lucky to have a hotel. At one point, we discussed where we were going to stay. So you have to be self-sufficient. We were very fortunate from the federal side, is that we had a lot of task forces that had their base of operations. They had food available. When we worked for the state and for the local departments, they were super kind and shared with us, but we were able to be self-sufficient. So had we not had those, available to us, we would have been fine. Not to mention the decon aspect of it, because our dogs were working in really nasty stuff. And so then being able to decon them after each search, decon ourselves, again, all of those things are considerations that the average search handler may not consider. So understanding that going into it, and that you might throw your stuff away. So the really pretty $200 collar on your dog is going to get tossed because the contaminants are serious. So I think as a trainer, which is why I did this podcast, is to just emphasize to people that if you think that you're doing enough, you're not, because the magnitude of the damage that was widespread in those conditions, it took a really strong dog. If you have a nervy dog, that's going to be a problem, because they're getting stuck in the hiney, and they're running through sticker bushes and mud, and there's glass, and there's all the things. So if you're one of those helicopter moms, it ain't going to happen, because there's no way you can protect them unless they are very solid at what they do, very level-headed, and know what they're supposed to be doing, because there was so much debris in so many formats. We had literally, in the days that we worked that, and I said to Anisi, I said, you have had every disaster criteria except for a fire, and even there were some areas that were burned, but you've had pretty much every criteria of a disaster in what you have worked in the last few days, which some handlers don't get their entire career. And the dogs all handle it beautifully. I have no doubt that Diana's dogs, because I've seen them work, and they do put things into their scenarios, and they work very hard, and they are very solid, balanced dogs without nerve issues. And so again, we all have to be real. I think that's my biggest, my biggest shout out is be real about your own abilities and your dog's abilities, and you can never do too much. The minute you get an ego about it and think, I got this, is the minute that dog shows you exactly what you got, because they speak for us.
Oh yes, very true. And as we've been talking here, we've highlighted a lot about dog kind of preparation, some of the training. But from each of you, what would you say that is critical on the human side? What is important for a disaster handler, cadaver, live find, etc.? Obviously what I'm bringing it to is, so in the military law enforcement world, there's a lot of focus on physical fitness, certain types of mental preparedness, situational awareness, things like that we go through. But in the search and rescue world, because there isn't the same kind of structure or support that exists, what would you guys say that now have experienced these types of disasters? What is the reality aspect that a handler must have or must be able to do this kind of work?
May I answer that? I think, number one, you have to be able to adapt. You cannot get so black and white and in your box that you cannot adapt to on the run. You got to figure out how to manage whatever you're doing. You have a lot of there's a lot of political aspect of it too. You have the local sheriff, the local fire department, the local, commissioners, whatever, that might be on scene. You have other teams that you may or may not have ever had any experience with, and you have to work within their system. You have to be an advocate for your dog and for your cause, but you also have to work within that realm, and you can't get, your panties in a wad, for a lack of better term,
Yep.
because something small happens. Also, I think mentally you have to be on par. You can't just melt down. Yes, it's hard. You're watching people's world be nothing. You're watching death. You're watching all of these things, and so you have to have a mindset and a way to properly manage that. I think as a team, we were very lucky. We do. We're all. Jack and I are both from the first responder background, so we have the sick humor aspect of it, and Anicia is right on board. She's very bright. She's very, she puts up with our crazy and is kind of the balance in the group, but she's funny, and so I think humor is a part of it. It may not be something that the rest of the world understands. But at the end of the day, you have to take care of yourselves. You have to take care of your teammates. And I think we did that very well. We made sure everybody was okay, even people that were not with us necessarily, but were a part of our team. And you have to be real about it. You have to figure out ways to work through it when you get home, because it's a lot. It's a lot to, to process. And when you're in the moment, you're not doing that. You're just working, and you're trying to make sure that the dogs are taking care of each other, taking care of what are we doing tomorrow. And so it's when you go home, you have to find ways to decompress and be able to adapt. But sometimes it's not going to go your way. You're going to hurry up and wait. You're going to search the same place 5 times because 5 different people smelled 5 different things, which happened to be the refrigerator or the fish or the giant cow. Whatever the case may be, and you can't get, hung up about some of that. If you have to make a stand, then you do it appropriately through the proper channels. But, sometimes you just do it because it makes them feel like they've covered an area. And if you have the right dog, it's not going to cause any issues.
Any one of you guys, what about for you guys, Jack or Diana, what are your feelings on what's needed from the human side to do this type of work?
Honestly, I think that a handler who has 1, 2, even 3, 4 years of experience and hasn't trained in any of this, this is not the place where you're going to bring them in. So I have several handlers that are in training right now. And they can flank and things on different types of searches, but not this, not yet. The way that we train our dogs and our handlers, even after they're certified, we don't let them work alone for at least a year. So we have some controls in place to make sure that the quality of work is good. So there's that. Mentally, I've been through a lot in my career, and I know that everybody else has too. So I'm preaching the choir. But you see a lot of bad things over the years, and there was plenty of that here. So mentally you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared. For instance, Anissa and I were sitting in one place near a church, and in this neighborhood, the church was really the only thing that survived. The entire neighborhood was wiped away except for a few apartment buildings. And we're sitting there, and we see a guy who's just walking around pretty much in circles. He looks like he's probably 19, 20 years old. He comes up to me, and Anissa and I are sitting there with Fiji. He says, "Have you seen my parents?" I said, "I'm sorry, son, I don't know. I haven't seen anybody but you, and we're waiting for our searchers to come out so that we can go in and search. Where are you from?" And he pointed over to the neighborhood that was non-existent anymore. So what do I tell him? I just tell him, I don't know. I'm sorry. If we find anybody, I'll let you know. And then he just started to walk in circles again. And Anissa and I looked at each other like, wow, that's pretty rare. You don't see that very often. And imagine what this kid's going through, waiting for his parents to come back. And to this day, I don't know if they were ever found alive or deceased. I have no idea. I don't know what kind of closure he got, whether it was, good or bad. No clue. So you have to be prepared mentally. I can tell you that a lesson learned for me, I've worked collapsed structure and confined space before, a long time ago in the past. And I had all my gear, unfortunately, sitting in a storage unit. And I didn't actually find it till after we were done with the deployment. But we still had helmets and boots and everything else, and we stayed safe. So we had proper PPE. But could it have been better? 100%. I could have had a better helmet. I could have had a second set of boots because I had one boot start to rip. The clothing, rip-stop clothing and different, pads and things like that to protect your elbows and your knees. Did I have everything? No. Did we have to adapt and overcome? We absolutely did. And we were fine. But you never know when you're going to need more of that. So, from a mental standpoint, you've got to be strong. From an equipment standpoint, you need to have everything that you're supposed to have so that you can survive this, without getting injured. And again, Athena talked about a mentally stable dog. These dogs that we're training and that we're working with, I can only speak for Fiji right now. I'll speak for her. She was working some searches anywhere between 2 and 4 hours at a time through 18 inches of mud, up and down stairs, while you're sliding, and it's just crazy. And there was a couple of times where she's flying up the stairs, and I can barely walk up the stairs. I can barely breathe. And so when I get up the stairs, I have to take a break. I have to drink some water. She's just staring at me like, come on, man. That's the kind of dog that we want. We want the dog that can go, 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 go. But another lesson learned for me was, when do I stop her? Do I let her search for 2 or 3 hours at a time? Or do I need to stop her and give her a break, give her some water, let her play with a toy for a couple of minutes, reset, give a hug, whatever. Let the dog kind of get that energy back. And early in the deployment, we were so focused on trying to find people. I tended to, I was letting Fiji probably work a little long. So I shortened out those searches and was giving water and everything else later. So there's that. There's a lot you just can't prepare for in this type of disaster. The distractions were just crazy. And I'm not just talking for dogs, but humans as well. You just stand there and you just look and you're in awe. You're like, wow, what is this? And it's funny because Athena was talking about Anicia's sense of humor. So we work together and we're on the same team. We all balance out. And quite honestly, Athena, when I was driving today, all I could think about is 877 cash now.
That's going to be in my head.
We were standing there one time and, we're talking and Anicia just blurted out. She started singing 877 cash now, and I cannot get it out of my head. It's been in my head. And you just can't get it out of your head. But you have to have that humor. Because if you don't have the humor, you're just going to cry the whole time and you're mentally not going to be able to make it. Am I an emotional guy? Absolutely, I am. Probably more emotional than those two. But without that humor and without those things going on, you just go crazy. You have to laugh. Even when you're surrounded by devastation and death, you have to laugh. The other thing that you have to be mentally prepared for is, where am I going to shower today? Oh, wait, we didn't shower for 4 days. And then when we finally were able to shower, it was in this little trailer that smelled somewhat like feces. The water was freezing cold. But you know what? It was running water, and there was a bar of soap in there. So I took my shower. And I was so happy afterwards. And we used that thing for several days. Another subject to talk about, it's reality. Kind of gross, but it's reality. Where do you go to the bathroom? You're going in the woods. You're going in the woods. You're going on a bucket. You have to be able to do those things. If you can't do those things, don't go. Some of my team members asked me to go, and I wanted to take them. But some of them weren't just ready yet. They weren't ready yet. In a couple of years, they will be. And if another one happens, we'll go with them. But for this particular one, no. Even some really strong handlers that I've known throughout the years, it was interesting because they messaged me and literally admitted to me, I'm not ready for this, I'm not going. And their teams were called and they absolutely refused to go. I applaud them for that. I think that's wonderful because they're looking at reality, they're considering what their training is, and they're deciding, you know what, we're not ready yet. I could go on, but it's just a lot of that. You have to be prepared for things that you're not prepared for, so to speak, for lack of a better term.
For sure. Diane, I'll let you go give what your point of view is.
Certainly all those things that they're bringing up are same things that we dealt with. I mean, I think where we went and the timing that we went was much better in a sense of, I mean, it was horrible, but when you compare it to what Jack and Athena, the very initial hours and days right afterwards, certainly. And I think handlers, even if you're going, you feel like you're ready to go and your dog's ready to go. Like I have 2 cadaver dogs, and my young one's 3.5. And, when my teammate got here, we were going to pack up everything from here and then leave from my house. And at the moment she got here, I'm thinking, should I take my younger dog or shouldn't I? I mean, these are the things that I'm working with. So, I had a pretty open conversation with her. And that's where the really solid teammates come in. And they're like, look, these are the things you've been struggling with him, and the things you're working on with him. If you take him, he may do very well, but he may not. Is his HR solid? Absolutely. Is his environmentals? Sure, no issues there. But he's a Labrador, and I have found that his food drive is beyond anything I've ever experienced. And we have that. You talk about there's going to be a lot of stuff available to him, and it will set me back tremendously in training. And that's just the beginning of it. The worst is he's going to be a mess there. He's going to be an embarrassment to the SAR community. He's going to be a problem. He's going to eat something he shouldn't eat. It's going to be a danger to him. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So he stayed home. He didn't go. He wasn't ready. So even in teams that are ready, you may have components that aren't ready, and it could be the teammates themselves, or it could be, like for me, my personal dog. So he didn't go. And even things where, like Athena was saying, you have to be an advocate for your dog. I mean, you come in, you've got everything ready, you've got all the gear, so you put yourself in an environment where you can be most comfortable in a very uncomfortable environment. That you have everything, like Jack said, you have your helmet, you have your boots, you have your gloves, so you step out ready for whatever it is you're going to see that day or on that next search. And we were approached on the very first day on one of the searches. Well, another dog, a lifeline dog, had a change of behavior, and that's one training aspect that I'm not sure a lot of lifeline dogs do. I mean, cadaver dogs, we expose them, or we try to all kinds of dead stuff, all kinds of things. Sometimes I don't think the lifeline, particularly like area search dogs, we should expose them to the same level of dead things out there. So they bring us down to the river, and like Jack said, the river was just, as far as you can see, completely covered in stuff. I mean, it was just like a platform out there of stuff. And the FEMA guy says, well, can you put your dog out there? And I was flanking my teammate, and she had her dog, and he's a big guy, big flat coat retriever. And I'm sure, yeah, the answer is yes, we can put him out there. But we're not. We're absolutely not going to do that. Because there's a river underneath it, and it's flowing really strong. And when he steps out there, it's not a platform. It's just lots of pieces of stuff that's floating together. And the first thing that's going to happen, if he's lucky, he might get a couple of steps out, and then he's going to go under the water, and we're never going to see that dog again. So you have to have the experience to be able to say, no, we can't do what you're asking, but you can look around at the environment and say, but here's what we can do. Because you've been on enough searches to look and go, maybe another, 200 yards down is a little bridge that goes across the river. And the wind is blowing in that direction, and the current's running in that direction. We can work the dog on that bridge. It's not that high off the water. If there's a body in this debris, surely the dog will pick up the odor at the bridge. And then we can work the other sides. We can work the sides, we can try to look at banks, or we can work across the bridge, but we cannot put the dog across that debris. It's too dangerous. So you have to be able to not just, you find your best way to say no to something, but also at the same time support them. You can't do this, but here's how we can accomplish what you're wanting us to do. And I think that's where, from a handler perspective, the experience of being out on a lot of searches, allows you to look at the environment and say, here's how we can help you. I understand what you want. Here's how we keep the dog safe, but yet do the job. And of course, in doing that is what was our first moment of being down, stuck in the mud, knee deep, and trying to figure out, and the dog's ready to go and wanting to keep going. And you're like, okay, I'm trying really hard, and our law enforcement is stuck down in the mud, and we're trying to get them out and us out, and the dog's still going, I'm going. And so you have all that going on. It's kind of comical at the end of the day, but then you also have to prepare yourself for the what ifs. What if your dog is injured? I mean, injured to the point of emergency surgery, which we had at the end of that day. It was just it was bloat. It wasn't any fault to anyone. The dog was not put in any environment that day that typically brings on a bloat for a big dog. Mm-hmm. He didn't show the symptoms like a normal bloat dog would do. It was an extremely different kind of set of symptoms that he had, and they were all like onesies and twosies, like, oh, the dog's stretching, and that's kind of weird. Or he kind of was grumbling at my dog, which these two kind of get along great, and you just kind of go, oh, that's kind of weird. And then within a few hours, it changed really quick. And now you have to turn everything, like Athena's saying, is where you staying? You don't have water, you don't have this, you don't have that. But now you have your own teammate has an emergency. And, we were blessed that the emergency vet just down the street had just opened the day prior. Because without that, we would not have had that. We'd have probably drive an hour or so at night. So now you're supporting your teammate whose dog may or may not live. And it wasn't that they were exposed to something or did something or training, etc. It happens. And if you have to pick that, I was kind of glad it happened. If you don't have a choice, this is going to happen. I'm glad it happened where it was, because she's with him at that moment. Mm-hmm. She could see the symptoms as they developed, and the emergency vet was available at that moment. But also, you can't stay the whole time. She's there, the other teammate's there, and like, okay, one of us needs to go back and get rest because we're still on a deployment. You still have to go out there the next morning, and you still have to perform. And you have to walk away from a teammate who needs you. So you basically think it through and go, okay, this person, okay, you stay and I'll go, and then you can come in later in the morning. And the community there, the department that called us out was just unbelievably supportive. I mean, they're experiencing, this is their community, this is their world, and they're still checking on our dog a couple of times a day. I mean, in the midst of all of this, it was just so unbelievable that we would even enter their mind to even check on us, kind of thing. And that very next day, when we showed up at staging, we sat the entire day. There were no call-outs that entire day, because the FEMA teams that we were attached to at the time, they were starting to encounter some of these self-deploying cadaver dogs. Mm. And they did not like what they saw. So now they're confused on, well, do we take out anybody that's not FEMA? So we sat in the staging area while they were having meetings and trying to decide. And like Athena said, you can't control those kind of things going on. All you can do is what you can do. You use your time. You get your gear ready again. You pull out these towels that are contaminated so bad, you go, okay, let's throw these away. And you basically get your stuff ready again. You don't sit around and complain about it, go, I drove this far, I should be, none of that matters. You get your stuff ready because the call's going to come again. And the next morning, it's just right back to normal. You're back out there searching, you can't keep up. So the best you can do when you walk in these situations is make sure your mind is right, your heart is right, your gear is where it needs to be, and you're there for the right reasons, and you do the best you can.
You guys are highlighting one of the things that my friend Tim Howling from his podcast interview brought up was the mental aspect that you have to compartmentalize in order to give that what he called like good customer service, and to get through what we're dealing with, you have to compartmentalize. And like you said, through the humor, through the other things. And that's at times something that isn't prepared for. and those that have served in the military and law enforcement, things like that, we've seen it in other ways. But in the search and rescue world, this is something that doesn't happen as frequently, clearly. But it's important that we find ways to be able to support each other, like you guys said, to be able to hopefully, before these kind of things, through the lessons learned from individuals like you guys, to help prepare people for these kind of things. Because just like the story that you had shared, Jack, with the family member looking for their other family members, that they were able to, it's a hard thing to kind of look at somebody. I guess what I'm trying to think is, like, one of the things that I went through, one of my first shooting I went to, it wasn't seeing the dead body. It was the screaming and wailing of the family members that stuck out to me the most in my memory. And that's not something that you go through in training. When you're doing, firearms scenario-based training, or you're doing a call-based scenario training, there isn't somebody screaming and wailing in the background that's a family member. So there's various things that you will go through, clearly, as you guys have all explained in this, that it's hard to train for. It's hard to prepare for that. But we have to kind of, through experiences of you guys in this kind of episode, sharing the important parts of that preparation. Now, moving it forward, let's go to each of you guys. Describe a profound search that you've gone through. And Athena, we'll start with you. What was, like, out of all the things that you went through, walk us through something that, one of the searches that was the most profound or stood out to you the most on this deployment?
Well, I think having to work my dog for several hours on a swiftwater river with just debris everywhere was pretty profound. I mean, I'm very fortunate because she's been on some searches that have had some crazy distraction type things in the environment, and a lot of people kind of merging in and things like that. So fortunately for me, that was not an issue for her. But for me, just keeping her in the boat, making sure that, as we're going down the rapids, that we're all staying in the boat. And I will tell you that we were very, very fortunate to have the guides that are in that area of the river that were managing that search. That was who I was with. And they are incredibly professional and know their river very, very well. I felt very, very safe. And they were amazing at maneuvering us, slowing us down, getting us into areas that we needed to check. And so that, I think, the kind of the beauty and the disaster meshing together was a little bit profound for me. And the fact that I'm going down the river in this beautiful part of the country, and there's so much debris, but there's so much beauty to it as well. And then the people, that this is their community, but they were giving it 100% all the time for hours and hours and days. And they were lovely and kind and smart. And I felt very blessed in that moment just to be able to be a part of that. But also it was very different than any water search I've ever, I've gone down the river for, a good amount of time, but 4 and 5 hours stopping in between to search debris piles is definitely a different, kind of search for me. And I will say I was trying to get Gypsy to just chill for a minute in between, like we're just kind of going down the river, and she worked the entire time. She refused to relax during that entire time on the boat. She truly was working that every minute of that. And I think that the level of pride I had for her work ethic, but also the worry of, because she's an older dog. But I just think the people, and in their tragedy, they were still coming out, and they had no homes, but they came out and they were doing the work, and they were being a part of the solution. And I think that was super profound for me.
What kind of boat? Because obviously, there's different feelings when it comes to the human remains side of detection dog work. And should we kind of like subdivide it within specialties, and one of those specialties would be, searching on the water.
Absolutely.
And from what I've seen, there's the type of boats that I see in training, but then in a disaster, you're grabbing anything that can get you in the water or what's useful. So tell us a bit about what you experienced. Like, what kind of boat was it? How difficult was it was it different than normal? Was it easier or harder for the dog or for you guys? I mean, definitely, like you said, the environment, without a doubt, was obviously completely different than what training could ever give you. But what about the equipment side of it, the boat, what you had to deal with the gear you had on, that kind of stuff?
So I'm very fortunate because I have done a lot of searches and a lot of different weird things, including a party boat at one point with this particular dog. Obviously, my younger dog, I would not put on the boat. He is not ready for that. He has not had enough training. So that in itself, absolutely, water training is a skill of its own. And if you don't have a heck of a lot of time under your belt and your dog's belt and good training, good solid training, that is not the place for you to be, because not only am I responsible for, determining an area for the divers to search, I'm then telling them they need to go into that area, and that is putting people's lives at stake. And I take that very seriously. My husband was a swiftwater tech. He was a diver in Los Angeles. And so that is, that's hugely important when you're making those decisions, because you're not just saying, yes, there's human remains here. You are then potentially putting other people in danger, including the boat operator and so on and so forth. That was a raft. There was no motor on it. It was a whitewater raft that they used to go down the river. And the driver of my raft was actually an apprentice with his mentor on that craft. And he was amazing. That kid could maneuver that boat, and he double checked, and they made sure, because the river had changed from what they're used to. But again, because I've done so much water work with her and done so many varieties of weird vessels, if you will, for me, it wasn't an issue. And she was very confident and very, she was fine on that space. And we've done a lot of like raft, with the swiftwater teams in our area. So she's pretty familiar with a small space and doing whatever she needs to do. But again, that goes back to experience. And I certainly would never have put my younger male dog in that position, because he's not ready for that. And it would have been, I couldn't have said, yes, we cleared these areas, and it would have not been a good, successful run. So again, it goes back to the right dog for the right job, and making sure that you put time and grade, and that they truly are very solid in what they do. But again, I teach a lot, so I get a lot of the excuses. Well, I don't like this boat, I like that boat, whatever. And I'm, the bottom line is, you have to deal with what you have available to you in that moment. And so the dog should be comfortable in any type of watercraft. Yes, it's lovely to say that we want our own. We had a boat in the lake, and we were very successful. It was great. We had a nice platform. But then also I was with one of the task force teams, and they, we were just in their boat. So, you can't be specific in the disaster world, because at that moment you have whatever is available to you to get the job done.
Absolutely.
If I could add to that, if that's okay.
Go ahead, please.
I want to go back a little bit, because one of the things that we were talking about earlier is how do you prepare, right? I thought about this while Athena and Diana were talking. You have to also check yourself, and when are you done, right? So what I mean by that is, we were on day 10. We're tired. We're exhausted. And we kind of all agreed, okay, this is probably our last day. And then a resource request came in over my computer for another county. And we had worked for days and days in Asheville, and then we were in another county, McDowell County, working lakes there. And then this next one came in for Madison County, and that's where Athena is talking about being on the river. Now let me go to that, because this is where I needed to check myself. I was also assigned to one of those swiftwater guys, and we were on one of the boats on the river in a different section, and we're already tired. We went on an additional day when we probably should have gone home. Fiji's out. We get her out on an island. We're working the island, and she falls off a rock face. And she starts limping. And I'm like, we're done. So I tell the guy, hey, my dog's injured. And again, I got to say, those guys were amazing. They knew exactly what to do. They grabbed me by the harness and everything else, and they pulled us all back into the boat while the water is rushing by us and everything else. So I mean, it was an extremely dangerous situation with an injured dog. Thankfully, after we got over to the other side of the river and they let me off, she was walking normal. So it wasn't serious, but I didn't know that at the time she came off. So my first thought was, well, do I keep going or am I done? And at that point, I was done. And so was Fiji. And I sat on the railroad track and hugged my dog. Went home. So that was important. I should have left the day before. And so that was a mistake that I made that I want to tell everyone, because you have to know when to check yourself. And for that day, I just wanted to keep going. And that wasn't the right decision. When it comes to something that you said, Cameron, a few minutes ago, you're talking about subdividing HR, because HR is extremely complicated. So one of the things that Anisia and I had talked about, we're going to experiment with this. We have 2 Mal puppies coming, and we're probably going to get a Spaniel for a different reason. And so what we're going to do, because really what Fiji's gem is water. She's a great water dog. She works through distractions. We train on a lake where they do the regattas or whatever it is, with the rowing. And so there's all kinds of buoys everywhere and stuff. So we train on distractions a lot. And she's a great water dog. And she is good at wide area. But then, what are her weaknesses? Well, she's got a couple of weaknesses, and one of those is crime scene. She's done it. She's been successful at it. We have a murderer in jail because of it. But is she the best at it? Probably not. Jack of all trades, master at none. So HR has always kind of been considered this one thing, or it's land and it's water. But I don't believe in that. I think, and we're going to experiment with this. So we're going to train just a water dog, nothing else. It's going to be on a boat its entire career. And that's the only thing it's going to be on. We're also going to train a crime scene dog. Crime scenes, that's it. We're also going to train a scattered bone and a buried dog. And that's the only thing that dog's going to do. And then we're going to have wide area dogs that can go find a dementia patient or somebody that hung themselves in the woods somewhere, because you never know what you're going to search for. We're going to divide those up, because what I found is, each one of these dogs has their expertise, so to speak. And if we can break that down and become more successful and train on just one section of that, because I will say, scattered bone is probably one of the hardest things I've ever. Why? Because it has no odor, or barely any odor. And it takes in the odor of the environment when it's sitting there on the ground for 5 years. So how do you train that? Well, if I got a wide area dog looking for a dementia patient, I'm doing scattered bone the next day, we're going to try this. And I think it's going to be successful. When it comes to equipment, out there on the water, we bought a bass boat for the team on purpose, because the platform is low to the water. It's very large. It's carpeted so the dog's paws don't get hot. And we used the heck out of that boat to the point where we caused several $1,000s worth of damage to the engine and the skag in the bottom. It's repaired now, ready to go, because the place that we bought it from was great. So we have that. But that's not the only thing that we worked on. I also worked on the raft on the river with Athena. She stayed out there a lot longer than I did, because we were done. But then we worked on a Zodiac one day. And then there was another fireboat out there, with a big old pump right there at the front of the boat. So Fiji had to work around that. And it was slippery. So when I first started training Fiji on water, those distractions would cause her to jump back or something like that. She's used to it now because of training. We're always training on a different boat. We're always training in different areas. We're making noise. We're doing all kinds of things. So I think that's super important. And so, yeah, we're going to subdivide it. We're going to try it. Your equipment's super important. And the most profound thing for me about the whole search wasn't necessarily the areas or anything else. It was like, check yourself. Know when to stop. Know when you can't do it anymore. And I think that's super important to keep yourself alive so you can come back and do it again later. Because if not, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get killed.
Absolutely. All right, Diana, what about for you? What was a memorable one for you?
I think the one thing that stood out mostly was the people there. Just you see so much devastation everywhere, and you know, like I said, they live there. We're just there to help, and we're going to go home. And everywhere, everybody was just so nice, so helpful, so worried about how we're doing, what else they can get for us. I mean, the one captain, he said, just tell me whatever you need, anything. I'll drive to another county to get toys for your dog if you need it. And we're like, no, we're good. We're good. We're here to help you, kind of thing. Or what can we do to help you? And I just, every day, we were just always greeted with just the best of everything, as far as their personality, their mood, everything. No one seemed to be in a bad mood at all. I mean, there was no anger. It was just all about helping and doing what's right. And regardless of where we were or how bad the conditions were, or whether it was the water or the strainers, or whether we thought there was a recovery being made or not, everyone was just so nice.
It's always amazing,
Yeah.
In those moments of pure chaos or disaster, when the best of humans come together. And in conjunction with that, and you guys kind of hit it too, the amazing part of nature. Like something that you go, there's complete devastation everywhere, yet there's also some of this amazing beauty. And I'll give my example. In Florida, we'd have, as you guys already know, hurricanes, but tornadoes from time to time. And there was this one incident where a tornado came through the area I lived in, and it was disaster everywhere. But the other thing that I remembered was the smell of pine. It was like like people would pay money for that beautiful smell of pine everywhere. So you have this beautiful smell, but then you're looking at disaster everywhere. And then throwing back in that human element, everybody coming together, everybody working together for the common good of each other. And it's the complete opposite of what we see a lot of times on social media and online. But when the chips are down and there's something that the fellow person is going through in our community, we can rally around each other and do the right things for each other, it's just the part, like you guys are all saying, we're a dog training podcast kind of thing, and we're talking about the most important thing that stood out to a lot of people was the human side of the equation. People coming together, people working together, doing things that probably wouldn't have happened any other way without this tragedy that occurred. And on that, though, there's an important thing I want to bring up, which is when something like this happens, people want to help. But without proper vetting or background or really knowing each other, you'll get what you guys will, and I'll let anyone of you guys talk about it, but how do you manage when someone wants to come out there with their dog, and it may be that smaller local search and rescue team or that group that says, hey, we want to help too. We want to do this, and maybe take it upon themselves to go do something with or without permission, or just dealing, like they may not know who to go to. And instead of trying to wait around, or as they would say, twiddle our thumbs to go do something, we took initiative, we took action. But what's the reality of that, and what's an important takeaway? And any of you guys can answer, all of you guys can answer. what came from that, from your guys' own experience, when you'd have teams that would show up with dogs and just start doing things, or in their mind they're being helpful, but what was a major
So I
consideration
feel
that had
like
to be
when you
dealt
do
with?
that, oh, oh, go ahead.
I'll
No,
start
Jack,
with that.
go.
Oh, go ahead, Athena. Go ahead.
Go
I'll
ahead.
wait.
You're fine.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'll start with that by saying that when we were there and the reality set in on how big this was, I actually put a post out on social media saying, if you're this, don't come. If you're this, don't come. If you're this and that, don't come. If you can handle these things, then do come. But when you do, get called by emergency management, law enforcement, or some other kind of government agency that's doing an official search and has jurisdiction over that area. Because if you don't and you start self-deploying, then all you're causing is another disaster. And we saw that. I was wonderfully surprised by when I put that post out. It got hit quite a bit. And there were several people saying, you know what, I'm not ready to do this. I'm not coming. They could have been called through EMAC or something else, but they didn't, because they had a reality check. And I was super proud of that. Some of the people I didn't even know, but I was proud of them anyway, because you make that decision not on ego, but on what's best for the public and what's best for the citizens of North Carolina in that area at that time. And so I was really proud of that fact. But then you have others who, some of them want to come in because they want to help. They just can't control themselves. There's no official way for them to get there, so they go anyway and they self-deploy. I know a few of the people that were out there that did that, and we've had a conversation, and I hope it won't happen again. But then you have others, and there was a lot of these. There were others out there that are just doing it for the glory, because the only thing that they can think about is themselves. And you can tell them a mile away, and I might get hit for this, but if you're going out there and you're wearing a tack vest like you're at war with a helmet, and you're running your dog on a 30-foot long line with this big old harness on a pile that could choke the dog to death, when you're equipped that way, you don't belong there. If you can't answer where your certification came from, you don't belong there. When your dog starts hitting on deer bones and a rubber worm, you should not be there. And what that did was it cost other teams, qualified teams who were there officially, to go out and confirm or quash every alert that one of these other dogs made. And it cost hours and hours and hours of wasted time and money for that to happen. Not only that, then there was one that actually, I talked to the daughter on the phone several times. Her mother has been missing. She's still missing to this day. And one of the handlers actually claims that he found her. And they had to quash that as well. And that just, all that did was cause more devastation in their minds and hearts of that family. And they're distraught enough as it is, trying to find her. And then you have somebody out like that with such a huge ego. They come out and they do that, and all it does is cause problems all the way around. It hurts the families. It hurts us, because now we have to divert to confirm or quash an unqualified dog's hit. And it was very frustrating. Luckily, our team, we were there so early, we departed before it really, really got bad. It was starting, but it got bad, once Diana and the rest of the Western Carolina was out there, it got real bad, and they had to spend a lot of time quashing this stuff. And I think the FEMA dogs did as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it just took away a lot of time, and that was very frustrating. And all you're doing is just putting people in danger when you do that. I don't know how to stop it. I really don't. I don't know if we can. But I'm considering at least approaching the legislature here in North Carolina with a bill. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but I'm going to approach them and talk about this, and we're going to try at least make it a misdemeanor, if not a felony, to do such thing, because they belong in jail, in my opinion.
Well, you said it wastes a lot of resources, and in the cadaver field, or say search and rescue field, it's one of the few detection fields where you see multiple dogs run over each other for potentially, most times, confirmation purposes. Yet we all know through training that when one dog does something right or wrong,
Correct.
the other dog may just mimic that for various reasons that we can clearly, we know cortisol levels, things like that, but there's still that thing that it needs more research. But we all can agree is through our experiences, the dog is emitting something when they're indicating, besides potentially just the higher cortisol levels. We know there's a body chemistry thing, and I hope the science will go deeper into that and give us more of a definitive answer than we've had so far. But we all, through experience, know something like that. So like you're saying, when people come out there with unknown training, unknown backgrounds, and they're deploying dogs, calling out, hey, we found this, or my dog's alerted here, and just like you said, now we got to put resources into this. Time can be critical. And if I'm dividing what precious resources we have in recovery to go do something for an unqualified or lack of experienced team, we're jeopardizing the bigger mission here, taking care of people. Athena, what would I know you wanted to add, so tell us what from your point of view, what you saw, what you wanted to say.
But I think also, if your dog is alerting in an area that doesn't actually have human remains because of a frustration or because of whatever, and you don't have the ability to understand that, or you haven't done the work, that too is detrimental, because then again they're marking those places as potential human remains instead of being able to clear them and say, nope, the dog did not alert here, and we can clear this large area and let's go to the next spot that maybe does have human remains. And though it's a recovery, it still requires resources, and it is, I've seen a lot of dogs that do throw behaviors when they search over their normal 15, 20 minutes, or in an environment that they're not used to, or they're pushed a little farther, things like that. And you kind of talked about the cortisol drop of another dog alerting. One of the things that we did was, like, we didn't want to know where anybody else's dogs had alerted, because we would get areas that they wanted us to cover. And even the people around us were like, pushing in. So if a dog is feeding off all that energy, around you, and they don't have the ability to dismiss that and just do their job, that too could potentially do an alert that is false and that is not actually in human remains. So, there's so much that goes into that training and experience. And I think, handlers think, well, I passed a certification, or I did this, or we do that. And again, the ego, like, let that ego go. There was times that I had the luxury of having 2 dogs with me. And so I could pick and choose, and my dogs got some rest in between that the other 2, their dogs did not. So the day that the river incident happened, Gypsy she had not worked the day before, because we, had moved back and forth about what was appropriate for each dog that I had with me. But again, I know that about my dogs, and so I have I had the luxury of having 2 of them. But at the end of the day, that could have been an ego check where I was like, oh yeah, I'll put Joey on a boat and we'll do all this stuff. And even though we do tons of blanks and things like that with him, I would never have done that, because that's a disservice to the people that were there to help. And it can create a lot of problems, a lot of manpower that should not be utilized on, those types of things. So, for me, it's, it goes back to your ego, it goes back to your training, and, and then just being smart about the whole thing and having a good strategy.
Yep. Diana, do you want to add anything in relation to that same topic?
We did get the unfortunate experience of having to actually go out to an area where other teams, if you will, that were searching. They were there on private property, not just searching with their dogs, but they had equipment, and they were moving things and cutting things. And the property owners, like, I don't know who these people are, and how do I get them off my property? And then the next day we show up to, we're supposed to be searching a particular area, and as we drive across this bridge, again, another private property that feeds in the riverside, there's a bunch of cars, and same group is there at that location. And the one law enforcement that was there the day prior with them, they'd been out there the entire day prior, says, here, let me show you where all their dogs alerted. And I was like, okay. And so he's taking me pile after pile after pile. And this pile they alerted, and over here they alerted, and on this couch they alerted. And then he goes into telling me they had went by the medical examiner's office and got a bunch of body fluids. And they were putting this out in the same areas. And at that point I said, well, I really thank you for telling me where the dogs are alerted. If that's where, like, my boss at the time is wanting us to search them, then we certainly will. But I'm now most interested in which piles do they put all these body fluids on? Mm-hmm. Because now, like Athena's saying, if you work in a water dog and you're asking a diver to risk their life to go in the water where your dog alerted, you better be really good at what you're doing. And now, if my dog alerts on this pile, and these piles we're talking, Cameron, are enormous on some cases. The temperature difference standing outside one of these piles and being able to crouch down underneath, easily 20, 30 degrees difference. I mean, it's amazing. And you look at some of them, you go, I can't even begin to even start. I can't walk away from this and say this has been searched until it's delayered to some extent. It's too massive. And if they're putting these cotton balls dipped in all this stuff and putting them underneath there, so one, their dogs can get training, and two, they get a reward, because your dogs have to be rewarded all the time. And then, of course, now another team like ours comes in, and my dog alerts. So now I don't know. Did my dog alert? At the time, sometimes you don't see a body, sometimes you do. And now we're going to ask responders to come in and delayer this. And every time you reach for anything, you run the risk of getting injured. And all that time and all that effort, and like Jack said, you can only do so much. And at some point you have to say, I have to rest. I have to go home. My dog has to rest. And if you waste days like this chasing this stuff around, it's just wrong. If you can't work your dog one search without having to reward them every single time, you shouldn't be there. And that's just it right there. If you can't work a pile that has a dead fish, and then don't get me started, there's dead stuff everywhere. But North Carolina has a lot of fish. There's fish everywhere. These large carps and bluegill, dead fish, they were everywhere. And obviously that makes sense, but it's just one of those where there's just a lot of fish.
But you're not expecting it, which is your point. You're
right.
not.
They're just like so much, and people are like, oh, I smell something horrible, and you just walk by, it's that carp right there. And that's the thing, is most people haven't been exposed to recoveries or decomposing bodies. So any of these smells, and you get the food, so forth, that can really trick people. And they're like, oh, I smell something. Of course you do. We all smell it, and the dog just keeps right on going, kind of thing. But the amount of time that's wasted, and the potential for problems, and of course they're told you have to leave. The law enforcement has them go, and then you run into them down the road. They're doing. They basically just drive around, and they see destruction, and they stop their car, and they get out and start searching. And their dogs have basically alerts on every single pile, and they'll call law enforcement. You need to get your other dogs. No, you don't. If you have to get other dogs to come in and validate it, then you shouldn't be there. Your dog should either know what they're doing, and you should be able to tell from your dog. Even if they're going to throw a false on a dead pig, a decomposing pig that's been out there 10 days, you can kind of tell your dog, something's different here, versus that truly committed behavior that you've seen over and over and over in training on target odor. You can kind of tell the difference. And you see dogs sometimes where they just throw a bark out, or whatever their alert is, and they even self-correct themselves, and they go, oh wait, sorry, and they go right on to work. But that was the hardest part, is just seeing the people that show up and just waste the time. And
well, to say, you're highlighting something I actually shared today on social media. It's Tim Robbins talking to. He's on a podcast, and he asks the host. He's like, look around the room and identify everything you can think of right now that's brown. And he says, okay, now close your eyes. And he goes, now tell me everything that was red. And of course, he can't think of anything. And then he says, okay, now look around the room and identify everything that's red. And so he does. And then basically what he shares is and the part I was trying to share to the dog world, especially detection dog world, is when we want to find something or we expect to find something, we will come up with every little thing that we can. And like he says in the video, he goes, I bet you looked at that beige thing and called it brown. I bet you looked at that burgundy thing and you called it red. And all these things to justify that feeling of you want to be right. And in this case, in a disaster environment, when handlers who may not have a lot of experience, they want to get out there and want to find things. So anything that their dog does, they're going to be like, that's an alert. They're going to call it. And then all these things happen. And it happens frequently in lots of different detection disciplines, is we want to go find something. It's all about finding. And not enough emphasis is on the searching aspect and the importance of searching, which is why I loved your post that you made on Facebook, kind of like an after-action debrief, which was the critical aspect that we must do blanks. We must do extensive or extended periods of time of searching with nothing. And I'll give another example. Was I did some training with a search and rescue group, and I'm known as the blank guy. Most people know when I'm coming to a seminar, you're probably going to do a blank somewhere. It's so hard for the human to do this search, and it's blank, that in this particular seminar that I did, as I'm leaving, going down the road, they have hides out. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, well, we didn't want to come all the way out here and not find something, so we just did. I'm like, but what's the value in that? What was the value that you got in the training of that? You just did it so you could feel good. Your dog was happy that it was out and searching. That's what it truly cared about. It had fun doing that. But, so me personally, I loved that post because of that. But is there anything that you guys want to add specifically in regards to the importance of training and making that blend of reality and training, but the power of blank? That's what I kind of like refer to it as. It's there's so much power there that comes from doing a blank search, and especially when it's a blank search that's blind to the handler, where you have to say, I think you guys can all agree in this, but it's way harder for a handler to come to me as a trainer or an evaluator and tell me there's nothing there than there is to tell me there's something over here. Finding something or trying to say there's something over here is a saying I use all the time that I stole from my friend Andy Weinman, which was, you're either pregnant or not pregnant. There is no kind of pregnant. So give me the answer. Is it something here or not here? Now, in certain disciplines, I'm okay with, hey, let's check this out further. But a lot of times, it's just so difficult because handlers have exposed themselves to this to say there's nothing here. I know my dog. I don't see anything here. And if there is something that's found, my dog couldn't smell it for whatever the reason is. But what do you guys say when it comes to something like that?
Oh, go ahead.
I would like to, on one of the things when we're doing
No,
evaluation.
go ahead. There's a lull, I think, between
I'm sorry,
us.
Athena. I was going to say on evaluation. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We have one of the certifications. There's a double blind, part of it, and I think you're spot on. It's, certainly there's a value to the dogs being able to work that and truly work it. But to me, I've seen over the time is the most value comes from that handler walking out of the area and saying those words. I didn't find anything. It is so hard, especially if it's their first certification. They will spend, if they get 30 minutes to work that area, you'll watch them in there. It could be a small area, it could be an acre. And they are going to turn over every leaf. They're going to use 30 minutes of the 30 minutes. Because they're just so afraid. And the dog's probably just sitting down, laying down, walking behind them by that point going, yeah, we don't know what we're doing, but mom's still searching, or dad. But it's that nerve strength for the person to come out and say, it's blank. So that's just been super interesting. But then you also see people, like anything else, if they're going to work blanks, you have to work it to, truthfully. You can't just go out in the woods and go, we're going to go on a walk and spend 2 hours, and I got 2 hours of nose time. No, you have to work it. You have to search. You have to push your dog. You have to, have your dog come over and check. You have to grit. You have to have a plan going in. You can't say, well, today I worked my dog on 4 hours of a blank. Did you really? Or were you just out in the woods just walking around? Because it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. So I just think people need to be really true when they're saying, okay, I'm going to incorporate blanks now. Really think about what you're doing. Think about why even if it's a blank, what is your objective for that blank? And what are you supposed to be doing? What are you going to get out of it? The last day we were searching, we were along this one riverside, and it's an area that cars can't get to. There's houses over there that probably will never be recovered because they can't get equipment there. So it's about a 4-mile stretch. And that's all. We'd already searched a couple hours, and now it's like a solid 3 to 4 hour search for Raven. And you're going through, and we're very clear in our expectations. Is this is either going to be it has to be a hasty. I can't thoroughly search this, and one, in the time frame before it's dark, and two, it would just be too much for her in this one setting. So you go through and you work in the best you can, and she's getting. there's nothing there, and I'm super proud of the dogs that we had there, the dogs that we saw that were working with our team, that were able to go past all these distractions and everything, just not just the things that were there,
Mm-hmm.
safety aspect and the amount of people. And then the feelings that you get when you see these huge bear prints that are just made. Like, is the bear still there where you're walking down to this riverbank? The bear could still be there, and all those things, roll into this search. And then the ways that you can break up your time with your dog to reward your dog for other things, or just kind of give these mental breaks. I'm real big about when you're working these long blanks like this. When somebody asked me before, so you don't reward your dog at all? No, that's not true. I reward my dog all throughout the search. It can be for, we were talking about earlier, on a recall, or if I ask them to go to the top of the pile, or if I give them a directional and she comes by me to the left or the right, I may say, good girl, as she's going by. My verbals are rewards. If I touch her, if I'm petting her, those are rewards. When she comes in for a drink. But having the river, even though it's contaminated, I can use that to my advantage. She's a Labrador. I can give these mental breaks. And she is absolutely by far the dog is that she's just going to work. But I noticed on that last day, on that last long search, she came to me and she just had this look on her face. She's got a tennis ball. She found a tennis ball. And I said, you know what? We're going to stop for a second. And I threw the tennis ball a couple of times. She's never brought a toy back to me during a search because she's working. She's like, I'm working and then I stop and then I play. But, I pushed her for days and days. So we took a 10-second. I acknowledged that she found this tennis ball. It's something that simple. And then I had to put it back because it doesn't belong to us. I don't know. It's just an old tennis ball, but it still doesn't belong to us. So we put it back. And she had that look of, I found that. And I said, I know, but it's not yours. So let's get back to work. And now she's working even stronger because she had a little mental, just a little quick break. Mm-hmm. And then you can go on. So you can incorporate these things in these blanks, but you have to, again, like I said, if you're going to do them, think about what you're doing and make them a valid training blank, it's not a hike.
Absolutely. Jack, anything you want to add to that?
So I agree with that. I think that blanks are important. You say, would you say the power of, was it blind or power of,
power of blank.
Blank, yeah. Power of blank. But there's also a lot of power in blind, and there's also a lot of power in known. It just depends on the situation of how you're working. So we do a lot of teams, and I'm guilty of it as well over the years, are guilty of working so much known that you almost don't know how to work an unknown or a blind. And a lot of teams don't work blanks enough at all. I think that Diana is absolutely correct. When you're going to work a blank, don't just take it on a Sunday walk. When you work your dog on a blank, you give it the command, you wear your clothes, you walk your patterns like you're supposed to, you walk with a purpose like you're working in a real scenario. Otherwise, the dog is just on a Sunday stroll. And I agree with that. So I have somebody that I know, and I watched this person work a blind the other day, And when she hears this, she'll know that it's her. So I'm not going to say anything about who it is. And it's not meant to be embarrassing. This is a training thing that I want other handlers to hear, is that when you work known so much, sometimes you'll find yourself in a position where your body language starts to cue the dog and you don't even realize it. You can't even see it. And I've done that, right? So you learn from that. And then you get stuck in an area. You might get stuck in an area, you see some behavior from the dog and you get stuck there and you can't pull out. And this person is not the only person I've seen do this. I mean, I've seen many others do it. So I think there's a lot of power in blanks and blinds. And I like the idea of timed blinds. We're going to start hitting those pretty hard because it's a little bit stressful. And you still don't know where it's at. And you don't know if there's anything in there at all. And you have to work it like you're on a search. And so hopefully that body language will eventually disappear of the cue and you won't get stuck so much. And if you do enough of those to where you're acing them, then, when you go out in the field, you're going to be well equipped to do a proper search. So I think, I agree that blanks and blinds are super important. And a lot of times we don't do enough of them. And to this day, I find myself guilty of it as well. And so I have to force myself, okay, I need to go do a lot of blanks. Now, I will tell you in one area that I am very adamant about working negatives is water. Because when I work water, and I don't know what it is with this year. We've had a lot of water searches this year. And some of those last for 20 minutes and some of them last for 4 hours. And you don't get to go back to the car. You might have to stop at the shore and give your dog a break and give him some water, or you might not have that option. You might have to just stay on the boat and let your dog take a water break there and do that. So I think that a lot of negatives on the boat is super important as well. And I like long negatives. And I'll do anywhere between 5 and 10 negatives before I put my dog on source again on the water. And I think that makes them more reliable. So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, and you're bringing up something that we've shared more of. And for me, it was more confirmed when Dr. Hilliard and Michael Ellis were talking about something very similar, but a different reason. Context can be very predictive. And if, for example, what you're bringing up is if you're going to the boat and you're going on the water and you're always finding something, after a while, the dog goes, boat, water, we're going to find something. Mm-hmm. And when there's nothing there, they may start saying, well, there should be, because this whole experience or this context is very predictive, which to your point, we have to make sure we find balances to whatever that is. So like you said, whether it's going to a building. I mean, all of us know, our dogs know when we're driving home or we're driving to a training area. They start moving around and it's like 3 streets away. They've already got it figured out. So dogs are really, really good at figuring out context. And if a context is predictive to a really great outcome, which is, highly rewarding, and of course, the higher motivated the dog is, the more this is, kind of magnified. But we have to make sure that we're adding balance. So if the jar of sand gets too full on one side, we got to make sure we level it back out and go to the other side and start showing the dog that just because, we're going on a boat and we're going out in the water doesn't mean we're going to find something. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we have to catch ourselves and do things like that, whether it be the boat or whether it be this field or et cetera, that we are aware of, that we balance out. That was not always a find. There's potentially zero here. And if we get out of balance, find the way to get back to balance on that. So I know we lost Athena here at the end, but I'll toss it to you guys. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share with those, either in the detection dog world, but more specifically within the cadaver search and rescue world, before we close this out? I'll start with Diana. I'll let you go first, and then Jack, you can follow up.
All right.
Oh, we lost Diana's audio there for a second. Hold on one second.
Oh, I have it. Sorry.
There you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think there's been a lot of just great points made in this, all these discussions between what people are doing naturally in training and what went on during the actual deployment. I think that a lot of people in our SAR world, if you will, have taken a look at this, checked themselves, said, I'm not going to deploy, I'm not ready to deploy, etc. But I also hope that that everyone, even those of us that went on the deployment, are still seeing how they can do things better, how they can do things right, what is the right way to train, to really push yourself, we can always just, I always tell people on the teams, like, we can put jars out in the field all day long and make yourself feel good about yourself. But we're never going to really search for that. So we have to push each other, use the right things, the right tools to do the right training. Training is where it all begins. So I think that's the most takeaway is really look at your training, see what you're doing, and if you don't have it, if you don't have the ability to do that, then reach out. I've never met Jack in person, but I've known him for years now, and I reach out and talk to him. And there's really good people, in this SAR world, if you will, that you can reach out to. The really good people are willing to help. They'll take the time to go over how they train, what they do, or how they've overcome certain things. And that's what makes this particular discipline really valuable, I think, is because we want to do the right thing when we go out for law enforcement or the community to help.
Absolutely. All right, Jack, your turn.
I agree with all that, so I don't really have much to add. I will say this. I think it's also important to listen to your other teammates, even if they only have 2, 3, 4 years of experience, because they're going to come up with something that's an epiphany for you, and it might change everything you do. I'll say, having Anicia on the team for the past couple of years, because she's so smart with behavior and everything else, she has brought a lot of good ideas to the team and really kind of upped our game and improved our level of efficiency and reliability, and I think that's great. So I'm super proud of her for that. She's been wonderful, and her dog Dahlia is an awesome dog, just an amazing dog. And I'll say, Athena as well, she has really kind of helped bring us even higher, and she has so much experience with disaster and everything else. Even having her out there on this call out in Asheville, without her, would we have been able to do all the things that we did? Probably not. But the other thing I'll say is there's certain things that you just can't train for. If you take your HR dog out and you're just working your dog on the same field, on the same blocks all the time, I will never deploy you, because if you're not doing all the things that we talked about during this podcast, I don't think your dog's going to be trustworthy. And I've seen it in the past where dogs have threshold issues and all kinds of stuff because you just only train on a few things. So you really have to vary your training quite a bit. I think that's super important. And so I think that's pretty much all I got to say about it. During this whole thing, talking about training and everything else, I think there's some great information.
Again, thank you guys so much for taking the time. If people want to find you, I just tell people to find you on Facebook because I know we're all there. So, again, text Athena, tell her thank you for spending her time going in and out. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch, and I'll let you guys know when this airs. And for everybody else, thank you for listening to K9s Talking Scents, where it's okay to be nosy.